welcome to Trip the Beltway Fantastic. News is moving so rapidly in the Middle East right now. Israel launched strikes against Iran on June 13th. The Iranians have been retaliating in kind, and then the U.S. jumps in with its own strikes against Iran's nuclear program on June 21st. On Monday, the Iranians engaged in limited retaliatory strikes on the U.S. military base in Qatar, and by the end of the day, Trump announced a ceasefire, which was barely holding on Tuesday morning. My head is spinning. I am so glad to have retired Colonel Douglas Macgregor here to sort this all out for us and give us his always astute, always realist and common sense perspective. For some context, Colonel Macgregor was the squadron operations officer who essentially directed the Battle of 73 Easting during the first Persian Gulf War. He was also a military planner during the NATO intervention in the Bosnian War in 1999, and one of the most important critics of the U.S. invasion of Baghdad in 2003. He has been a solid voice for military reform and restraint in the last 25 years, and I am proud to call him a friend. Thank you, Doug, for joining us on Trip the Beltway Fantastic.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure we can sort it all out, but we'll give it a shot.
We're going to give it a shot. So let's talk about this ceasefire that Trump announced last night. Will it work?
You know, I think it'll probably work for some period of time. I don't know how long. We have to understand that the ceasefire that we currently see is something that Israel needs, which is not what is being reported in the press. In the United States, you simply get this narrative of Israel almighty, and nothing stops them, nothing harms them. In reality, Israel's in a lot of trouble. They have probably fired more missiles and dropped more munitions in the last 2 weeks than we can manufacture in 2 years. And so they're running out. By the way, the U.S. military is not in a great position when it comes to missiles either, because we've shipped so much to Ukraine and off to Israel. We're a little low. And I think I'm saying a little low. It's actually much worse than that, particularly if you're on an Aegis class destroyer or something. So that let's be frank. There was a reason that this ceasefire came about. It wasn't because President Trump suddenly woke up in the morning and decided that he, the master of the universe, decided that we should have a ceasefire. The question is, why would the Iranians go along with this? Because they are not necessarily in need of such a ceasefire. They have almost inexhaustible quantities of missiles. They're in the opposite position. They've been building up this arsenal for 20 years, preparing for this war. But I think the Iranians are ultimately interested, if they can do it, to regain some measure of stability in the region. They would like that. I also think they're listening to the wise counsel of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, but I think primarily Putin, who said this is something that you can do, and recommend that you try this and see how this works. And I think that's about what they're doing. The sad part is that, of course, President Trump, who's a brilliant master of media manipulation, came on and sort of took credit, as always, for everything that was good, ignored everything that was bad, and likes to tie this to what he thinks was this big, beautiful strike that was launched by the U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy a couple of days ago. And of course, that's not true. And we haven't destroyed the nuclear capabilities. It looks like we hit the equivalent of three or four empty buildings in 3 separate locations. The stuff wasn't there, was moved. So that's by no means over at all. And in fact, I think the principal lesson at this stage for everyone watching is, gosh, I better get a nuclear weapon, or I too am going to end up like Libya, which of course is the dream wish of our friend, Mr. Netanyahu. But there are problems in Israel. As I said, their economy is about dead. Obviously, as long as they control us to the extent they do, we will try to replenish their funds, and we'll try to ship them whatever we can in the meantime of military technology and equipment and munitions and missiles. But I think the larger issue is this: can Israel survive this at all? And I don't think anybody's addressing that, because nobody really understands how bad it is. And the Israelis certainly aren't going to tell you that. They're going to say, oh, no, everything's fine. Just look, I'll send you pictures. Okay. It's not good. and there are hundreds of thousands or more trying to leave the country. Stefanou in Cyprus, one of the leaders of one of the largest patriotic Cypriot parties on the Greek-speaking side of the island, gave a speech yesterday and essentially said, we're losing control of Cyprus because the Israelis, people from Israel, are buying everything up, buying up the real estate. Pretty soon we won't have a country anymore. This has to stop. Now, why would that be happening if things are going so well for Israel? Yeah. I think there's a certain disconnect from reality. And I'm listening to people talk about 4D chess. It's time for Donald Trump to get his Nobel Peace Prize. Well, I guess we just wait, because I don't expect the current conditions to last. I just don't know how long that is. Is that a week? Is that 10 days? Is it 2 months? Because at the end of the day, the real takeaway from this whole experience is that everyone in the region, and I mean everyone in the region, from North Africa across to the border of the Indus River in India, has concluded that they cannot coexist with this state, and this state cannot coexist with them. That's the problem, the real core problem.
So it sounds like Donald Trump offered a Band-Aid for the situation. Now, I've heard that Netanyahu is really, quote unquote, pissed off right now because he hitched his wagon to Trump for us to bail him out, and then Trump turned around and insisted that he agree with a ceasefire. You've pointed out quite rightly that it seems like they had a decision to make, that they couldn't do these actions against Iran indefinitely because they couldn't sustain the missile defense on their end in Israel. But others have said, Netanyahu doesn't think that way, and he will probably restart this war out of his own narcissism, his survival instincts politically. What are your thoughts on whether or not it'll hold on Israel's side, even in the face of their dwindling arsenal?
Well, there's another unspoken feature of this, and that is, of course, oil and natural gas. Mm. And I think President Trump was alarmed by the possibility that the Straits of Hormuz could be closed, not because we're as dependent on that oil as we once were. On the contrary, we're not. But that will have a global impact, and it would have a huge impact in Asia. Now, the people in Japan, in other words, the governments in Japan and Korea, have announced that they're not attending the latest summit or meeting that's going to be held. And they regard us as close to insane as you can imagine. They don't understand what we're doing. They don't understand what Israel is doing. These are people that value stability, predictability, prosperity. And so for them, for China, for Korea, for Japan, Vietnam, all of those states, peace is the overriding desire and goal. War is a last resort. And they're dealing with a state in the form of Israel, and to a lesser extent ourselves, that we almost behave like drug addicts. We have cravings and desires. We act on impulse. We're unpredictable and dangerous. I don't think President Trump understands that once you move beyond the borders of the United States, anything he says is white noise. Nobody believes us anymore about anything. So, to answer your question, I think Mr. Netanyahu, on the one hand, would very much like to restart this, but on the other hand, he's got Smotrich, who is no less of a hate monger and murderer than Mr. Netanyahu, telling him that the economy is about to fold and go completely under. He has others, I think, on the military side telling him that we're strapped. We've done everything we can. I mean, short of putting a missile defense battery in the backyard of every Israeli home, there doesn't seem to be much hope of lasting or staying together through this war. And I think if Mr. Netanyahu is angry about anything, it's that in the final hour, Donald Trump, who was put into office to a large extent by Mr. Netanyahu's allies and agents in the United States by the use of tremendous funding, and also by turning off opposition that had previously been against him because they too are part of the Zionist camp. I think that, well, let's put it this way. I think that Mr. Netanyahu is disappointed because we were expected to fight the war for him.
Yeah.
And President Trump does have some political common sense, and he looked around and said, I don't think I can do that.
Right. But do you think, and I know some of the folks in my orbit, more conservative / maybe restrainers are saying that Trump can take some sort of victory lap this morning because he has shown the rest of the world what strength, peace through strength means. I know you're rolling your eyes, but stick with me for a second.
We could not master the Houthis, right? Suddenly we decided we were going to take on Iran on behalf of Israel. That clearly was a no-go. And we launched these strikes against what were ostensibly targets devoid of any technology of people, which, probably is a good thing. But at the same time, no one struck back at us at the time. In other words, the radars were turned off. No air defense system sought to shoot us down. One wonders if this is just political theater for consumption inside the United States, right?
Right. And same with yesterday's retaliatory attacks by Iran. They were telegraphed in advance. The base was empty. There was no damage or casualties, and it was over. So lots of theater. My question is, so Trump has all but said that he was luring the Iranians into a trap with these diplomatic talks for a new deal. Now, is that true? Was he just doing his typical true social boasting? But the message has gotten out there that these talks were somewhat of a ruse. What does that bode for peace talks in Ukraine, for example, or other diplomatic efforts that the Trump administration has promised to engage in? I mean, this is a serious question considering just a month or two ago, we were trying to get both sides in the Ukraine war together to talk. What does this do to the credibility of the Trump administration on that score?
Well, it's non-existent. As I said, once you move beyond the borders of the United States, nobody believes anything we say. The Russians have walked away from us. I mean, they'll be polite to us. They're not interested in going to war with us. By the way, neither is Iran. But nobody's going to believe anything we say anymore. That's the final analysis. The difference is that right now, even though Zelensky and Netanyahu have a great deal in common, it's very interesting. If you look at the position of the two men strategically, there's more commonality than people realize. But in the case of the Russians and Zelensky, the Russians are pressing to the West as quickly as they can go right now. And they are still very, very casualty averse. They don't see any point in losing large numbers of people. The war is effectively over. They're not and never have been interested in murdering millions of Ukrainians. It's a lot of nonsense. The Ukrainians are crumbling in many places. There are many surrenders, and lots of people are withdrawing and going home. But, until it's over, it's not over. And I think the Russians will cross the river, go to Kiev, and then move down to Odessa. And then at some point, everyone in Europe will have to sit down with them and come to new territorial arrangements, which is, that's never happened before in Europe, has it? This has been going on for hundreds of years. So, that'll take care of itself. The Middle East is a little different because we have this very fragile economy, and everybody knows it. And everybody is quietly panicking in the corner without saying anything publicly. I mean, the Germans, for instance, the Italians have now joined the throng and says, please give us back our gold. Well, why would they want their gold back all of a sudden? And guess what? They're not getting it. And there are now real questions as to whether or not we've actually got it. And what's been going on for the last 80 years, I think we're the victims of people that we put into power after World War II, who saw the opportunity to exploit that power, not just for America's strategic dominance, but also for their own private fortunes. So we'll have to see. But again, it's back to what I was saying before. I think the Japanese and the Koreans are going to ask us to leave, which is very difficult for them. They're polite people, but they're going to ask us to do that. the whole notion of ever intervening to protect Taiwan from a non-existent threat, that's going to go to the wayside. And at some point, the bond market is going to blow up. The derivatives market will return and smash us. So you can kiss goodbye this trillion dollar defense budget. You'll never see it. I mean, but that's not what people hear. What they're hearing is what the usual suspects want them to hear in Washington. But I think Trump senses some of this, but I would not underestimate the possibility that he believes much of what he says about himself. Remember, he talks about everything as, oh, well, these two just need to get along. I mean, we heard that about the Ukrainians and the Russians. Now he's saying it about the Israelis and the Iranians. Iran is not going to crumble. There will be no regime change. If anything, the current regime is being strengthened by the whole experience, which all of us said, if you do this, the chances of anything good happening that you think is good at any rate inside Iran are not going to happen. And of course, Iran.
Oh, you mean the Shah is not going to return?
No.
Crown Prince.
But you still have the Mossad types threatening to murder people. We're going to murder generals and their families. We're going to murder you and murder you. This sort of Zelensky
nuclear scientists.
Yeah, the Zelensky-style murder campaign, Zelensky-style assassinations, Bibi Netanyahu-style assassinations. This is what they've got. This is what they'll try to do. But the bottom line is, again, what we said before. Israel is a foreign entity in the region. I realize that the evangelicals will be horrified to hear that, but the truth is Israel's an artificial construct of the British Empire and Rothschild money. Now, a lot of us thought it had a positive impact for a long time. It could do good things. I think the balance is now shifted away from that perspective. People now see it as a catalyst for destruction and hate and war. I don't see how it survives that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are upset today that it does seem that Netanyahu used these strikes against Iran. This whole operation started on June 13th to distract in part from what's going on in Gaza, where you have scores of people who are being killed at these creepy Hunger Game aid distribution centers, in which these people running these aid centers are saying, you can come up, you have to stay, you can't go near that part of that fence, and people who get confused or go outside of the rules are shot. And this is happening every day, but it's all under the radar because we are too busy talking about the possibility of regime change in Iran and how brilliantly our US military performed on Saturday night. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about what might be going on inside the Defense Department. Trump had said something about the brilliant minds that inside the DoD that executed this operation on Saturday. You know, I did a story on General Michael Kurilla, the Gorilla Kurilla, who apparently has Trump's ear, is one of the few people that actually are getting in to talk to him these days, but is also a favorite general of the Israeli military. I mean, there was some hope that there might be some sane voices inside the DoD who would be counseling Trump, but it doesn't seem like he's getting the best counsel.
Well, as we've discussed, I think on many occasions, presidents get the intelligence they want. Presidents get the counsel that they want. And I think General Kurilla, like David Petraeus and Jack Keane and many others, have learned that if you want to be successful, you want to be promoted, you want to be advanced, and ultimately you want to be enriched in retirement by financial firms in New York City, who are controlled by most of the same people that are adamantly supporting Netanyahu's war on the world inside the Middle East. Then you tell the president what he wants to hear. And the president doesn't want to hear anything that you and I are discussing at all. In fact, it would be worse than cognitive dissonance. He would probably fly into a rage and say, this is impossible. You're absolutely wrong. I mean, that's the Israeli position. You know, anybody who contradicts them, their narrative that they're pristine, they're wonderful, they're God's gift. And by the way, we can go on fighting forever, which is nonsense. If you decline to accept that, you are the enemy. And so that's where we stand. So if you want to be in President Trump's good graces. You want to text with the president like Bill O'Reilly, who announced the other day that he's texted back and forth because the president's a genius. Then that's what you're going to get. None of this matters. Let's be frank. None of this is going to last. Current conditions are going to change. It's going to get worse in the Middle East, not better. The little emirates that are family dictatorships, those people are living in fear right now, not just of Iran, but of their own people. The same thing is true inside Saudi Arabia. Why? Because they are all enraged by what's happening in Gaza. They are all Amalek that deserve to die. They're subhuman. Then you have this strange phenomenon in Syria. Syria is a very strange place now. The former deputy head of ISIS was welcomed to the fold by President Trump, who claimed to destroy ISIS. We all know that never really happened. We pushed them out, but we didn't destroy them. And he seems to think this is a very nice young man who's going to do great things. Right now he's killing Christians and anybody who's not a Sunni Muslim. That's very nice. Then you have on the other side, Mr. Erdogan, and he gives great speeches. He says all the right things in terms of criticism of what the Israelis are doing, but his population is wondering what's next. What are you going to do? You were the Sultan. You were going to lead us back to greatness. And what are you doing? And then you go over to Sisi in Egypt, and Sisi's got this army sitting on Israel's borders, and he's afraid to move. And what I've been told repeatedly, the Israelis have said, if you go against us, we'll lob a low-yield nuclear weapon at the Aswan Dam, and that'll be the end of you in Egypt. And then, of course, you have Abdullah in Jordan. Abdullah is on extremely thin ice because he's seen as a shameless puppet. It's a very strange region, but we have to understand the populations there are seething with anger. They have had it. So I don't think the status quo is going to last. In other words, we're going to see big changes in that map in the future. What you see today will not exist in the next few years. But everybody, America, are microwave thinkers, Kelly. They we have a new policy. Boop, turn on the microwave. Boom, out comes new results that are good.
Yeah.
We know that doesn't work, but that's what people think. And they see the microwave president. Well, I intervened and now everything has changed. And I'm going to make those two children work together because I'm the big daddy. Good luck.
Turn those planes around.
That's right.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with you, Doug, about the dynamics. One thing that does bother me, the common thread of all those places, or nearly all of them that you mentioned, was the U.S. military and providing planes and bombs and infrastructure there was Gulf states, for Turkey, for Jordan, for Egypt, all the aid that we give to them. And that sort of binds us to us and therefore binds them to Israel in a perverse way. And so, and it further entrenches us in the region. We can't leave. All those expectations about starting to, lessen the military footprint in the region, that Obama started it and then Trump promised it. That's not going to happen as long as our military is continuing to give them arms and have a presence and the bases there. So I think that radical change coming up from the grassroots is always threatened by the fact that they have the U.S. military to keep their populations in check, and particularly when it comes to any backlash against Israel.
Well, that's right. And remember that in the case of the United Arab Emirates, as well as Saudi Arabia and other states in the region, they have effectively paid for all the non-recurring engineering on our major weapon systems. If Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, for instance, did not have these vast sums of money coming in, everything would seize up and stop. They'd have to do their own research and development and pay for it. They would have to do their own non-recurring engineering on all new systems and pay for it. We've been getting away literally with highway robbery for decades for the reasons that you outlined. That's all going to begin to collapse because something else has happened. A lot of our weapon systems have not performed to expectation. And we have learned another lesson that we should have remembered a long time ago. I was talking to a friend last night and I said, well, obviously, If you have enough missiles, you can overwhelm any missile defense system. Yes, that's right. That's why you got mutual assured destruction, because everybody realized you can't defend against this. But if you both possess enough weapons to annihilate each other, that creates a certain degree of stability, provided you are rational. Well, that's what's happened again. And now somebody said, well, don't Israel and Iran share mutual assured destruction? No, a 9 million person state, of which only 7 million are Jews and the other 2 million are Arabs, up against 92 million Muslims inside Iran, that's turned out to be a much more cohesive society than we thought. They're not going to prevail. It's not going to work.
But Israel has nuclear weapons.
Yes, and I think, again, it may be that we'll wake up and discover that the Iranians have nuclear weapons, in which case, if you use it against us, we'll use it against you, and you will vanish. See, this is why the idea of a nuclear-free zone, if you were really interested in thriving and building prosperity and peace in any fashion at all with your neighbors, would have been the best outcome for Israel. But they instead managed to hold on to this monopoly. And they like the monopoly because it allows them to bully others, to threaten others, to drive them down a road that they would otherwise not go. Iran has stood up and said, no, we will not accept that. And Putin has made it very clear, I think in private, I can't prove this, but I think in private he's probably said to Netanyahu, you use a nuclear weapon against Iran, and you will see a nuclear detonation in your country. So I think, we're past all of that now. Everything's changed. I think Donald Trump sees the oil monster. I think he sees the nuclear monster. I think he's very much afraid. He wants the ceasefire. He's acting as though he was the architect of all these great things. He was the architect of Indo-Pakistani peace, right? That was the other great thing he did.
Oh, yeah.
And he could have been the architect of peace and prosperity in Ukraine if only those pesky Ukrainians and Russians would have sat down and listened to him. No, this is all nonsense. We're a runaway train headed down the mountainside. And I don't know how we get off this track before we hit the bottom. In fact, I don't think we will. So in the distance, and we don't know how far out, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, could be 6 weeks, could be 10 weeks, is this financial crisis and potential economic implosion in the U.S. And then on the other side, you have the externals. What are you going to do? And the best thing we can do very shortly is conclude that we can't do much and focus here at home. But
you mean America first.
That's right. And that's what everybody voted for Donald Trump to do. I would say everybody, because clearly the people with the money that sponsored him and supported him and got him in the White House have no interest in the United States at all. None. And that was evident at the Republican National Convention. Nobody wanted to see it. When you saw this giant Israeli flag on the wall, and above it was a big sign that said Israel first, and out came this rather plump man in a suit to say, Israel first. And then the audience, and others sort of looked around and said, what? And that was something that had never happened in the history of American politics. That would be like bringing in the Mexican flag, the El Salvadoran flag, or anything else you want and saying, Mexico first, Viva Mexico. And everybody would say, huh? It doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yeah, bring in the Cuban flag at the Democratic National Convention.
Exactly.
Cuba.
Yeah, by the way, here's a little anecdote that somebody brought to my attention last night as I was reading. I go back and read things and I listen to people because I'm always trying to see if there's any way forward other than what I think. And this particular individual said, in 1956, when Adlai Stevenson accepted the nomination for the Democratic Party to run again against Eisenhower, he gave a brilliant speech out in San Francisco. Everybody said it. Eisenhower said he gave a great speech. And after it was over, this woman went up to him and said, Mr. Stevenson, that was brilliant. That is the best I ever heard. Every thinking, intelligent, and educated person in America will vote for you. He said, thank you, madam, but I need a majority. That's where we are.
Well, let's end it there. I really appreciate this. So many great insights. I know we didn't get to everything, But I just think it's so important to hear your analysis today. We're going to try to get this up right away because events can overtake this show almost immediately. But thank you, Doug, for everything.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly.